Welcome to our Garden Center. My name is Michelle and this is Doug, and we'll be teaching the class today, so welcome. To start out with, how many people are new to the area? Everyone! That's great. Welcome. One of the things we want to talk about today is just to intro, we kind of have a whole different scheme of things here, different climate, different growing conditions. So our landscape design is probably not going to be what you're used to from wherever you moved to, whether it's back east or California, even the mountains of Colorado, we're just not there. Does that mean you're going to have a boring landscape? No. We have great plants here, things that do really, really well, whether it's flowering or evergreens that you're looking for, which we can help you out. We have a service that's a consultation service. It's not a landscaping plan by any means of the definition, but there are 3 or 4 of us that actually go out to houses, and we spend an hour with you. We can walk the property, we can do some identification for you, we can give you ideas on what plants are going to grow best for you. So if you're starting, whether it's, you're starting in a brand new house with nothing there, it's completely rock or dirt, and you're starting from scratch, or if you move into an older home that has some overgrown landscapes, Waters Garden Center can help you.
Back to the newcomers idea, I just wanted to follow up with what Michelle said. We have another class, it's called Gardening for Newcomers. I think it's coming up on February 15th. So Michelle and I do that together. And it's a lot of fun. I started out by kind of poking fun at the people who moved here from California, and then admit that I'm one of those as well, and so it's okay. But we talk about everything that makes gardening here unique, different from where we might have learned. The premise of the class is that most of us learn to garden somewhere else, and that certain conditions here dictate a different approach to gardening. So we have the class schedules on the website. We've got brochures here. That's Gardening for Newcomers coming in a couple of weeks. But today we're going to talk mostly about how to plan your landscape, whatever level that is. Some folks say, "Look, I just moved here. This landscaping is in pretty good shape, but I'm not sure what all the plants are and how to take care of them. I'd like to add a few. How do I go by doing that?" Less likely to be, there's moving into a brand new house. Nothing here but dirt and a foundation. What do I do? We've done a few of those, but that's not so much our plan as much as, okay, I'm here, this plant is dead, what do I replace it with, what's going to do with all that sort of thing.
And I think the most important question in landscape design is, what are you looking for? Everyone's different. Some people are looking for a nice, quiet place that they can sit and drink coffee in the morning. Or they've got grandkids that are coming and they want a play area that has some life and color and things like that. Or some people like birds and butterflies, so that they want flowers that are going to attract those things. So it's really, really important for you to kind of know what you're looking for to begin with. Know what kind of design you're going for, whether it's formal, or just a few spots of color just to add some texture. Or I know a lot of people don't like the DG that we have. Everything's brown, white, green. So there are ways to add color without just doing one plant or the other. if you mix it up, you get seasonal color throughout the year and not just one time of the year.
Here in the springtime, we have usually forsythias are the first plants to flower, and they have beautiful yellow flowers. And as you go through the season, it's nice to have something that's always there, so you don't have this push of flowers in maybe April and May, and then the rest of the season, not much. When you start out with the forsythias, you may notice when you come in, there's some pampas grass out there by the gate. And the thing that's nice about pampas grass, it usually doesn't get going with those plumes until late August, early September. And those are still doing okay, doing nicer than mine, which have gotten a little beaten up in the storm. So the key is, say you start out with forsythia, you end the season before everything goes dormant with the pampas grass out there. And in between, the goal is, what else can I do? What can I do so I have color from one month to the next? One plant sort of is finished with its blooms, another one comes along. That's a great approach, and that's something that we can help you with. And then, as Michelle was mentioning, when you are contemplating something, a landscape plan, something, whatever it might be for your yard, spruce it up, add some color. It's really important to know your area, know your backyard, your front yard. Where, how's the sunlight situation? Does it come up 5 in the morning? And are you looking for shade trees outside the kitchen window? Know where the sun rises and sets in your yard. And bear in mind that most plants and trees are going to be full sun plants, although we do have shade plants. And we define full sun usually as about 6 hours per day during the growing season. Doesn't matter whether it's morning or afternoon, it can be a combination. One thing to be aware of is the late afternoon sun here can be pretty intense on some plants, but knowing how much sunlight you get is important. The other thing is the fact of life around here is that most of us have animals in our yard, or they travel through our yard. If you've got a fenced-in protected area, great, very great shape, but most of us have either javelina or deer that can come in and really do a number of damage and eat everything. If you've got both, good luck. You really have a challenge. And there are underground pests as well. I don't mean to sound discouraging, but the point is that you need to know, okay, I have javelina, and you know what the javelina tends to like and tend to stay away from, and we can help guide you in plant selections. There's nothing more discouraging than to plant some beautiful roses, and they have wonderful flowers, and you love them, and so do the deer. So you come out in the morning, and the deer have eaten most of your roses. That's pretty discouraging, and it can happen, but there are ways to try to work around that and mitigate the situation. So that's important. So kind of like know yourself, know your landscape, your area, your backyard, know what the climate looks like, walk around the neighborhood, see what you like, what you don't like, see what does well. That's a good sign that something that's doing well in your neighborhood is then going to do well in your yard as well.
And Doug hits on a really important point. You really want to take a look around. Some of the plants are the same as you're used to, and then there are others that are different. And they all bring different colors and textures to your landscape. So whether you do a consultation or just bring pictures into the nursery, will all help you identify and try to figure it out, what plants you're looking at and how it's going to help you in the landscape. There are other things to consider. Are you looking for privacy? Did you just move into a house that has really close neighbors? Do you want to just kind of filter that? So it's really important to kind of make a list, while you're sitting out there. So start dream big, put all the things down that you're looking for in your landscape design, and that'll help. One thing to mix it up is different textures, colors. We like to plant in masses, groups of 3s, 5s, just to get that bang for our buck. So that's been in landscape design for a while. Texture always helps give the eye something different to see. And how do you add texture, whether it's a blue spruce or a gopher plant. They both have that beautiful gray blue color, but it kind of depends on, how big your space is and what you're looking for. So there are different ways to add that different color to your landscape.
And function is important as well. Back to looking at the neighborhood, I was doing a consultation. These folks had a new house, and I said, see this window right here? Guess what? The headlights from the car that come down the street go right into that window. It's a bedroom. It's not that exciting. What can we do about it? So I kind of looked around and looked over at the neighbors, and they had photinias, red-tip photinias, big tall shrubs. I said, do you like those over there? Because those are great privacy plants, and they will get up to the height of that window and fill that in. And they said, yes, I love those. We're looking at them just a little ways away. And so there was an example of, okay, here's the need. How do you fill that need? You like the photinia? They didn't even have to come here to see them. They weren't familiar with them, but they saw that over there. And I think the neighbors had them growing for pretty much the same purpose. It was near a window, there was some little bit of privacy. So again, looking around and seeing what is happening in the neighborhood and thinking in terms of function is important to help you decide. Whenever you come here to visit us, we are always ready to walk you around, take you, show you this and that. Okay, I need this privacy hedge. Okay, do you like this? No, I don't like this. Okay, about number 2. Yeah, I like this one. This is how tall this gets. This is what the function that will serve. Do you like it? Yes or no? Obviously, it's important before you invest in a shrub or a tree to make sure that you like it. But then you have to make sure that it's also serves the function that you have in mind.
And we like to offer a lot of different trees and shrubs, whether you have a large yard with, a half acre, or you have a small patio home where you have, a 10 by 20 space that you're trying to just add some color to. You want the right plant for your conditions. You don't want to put a full-size autumn blaze maple if you only have 10 feet of a yard. You're going to get way overgrown and you're not going to be happy with the result. But there are other shade trees that would work in a size that, whether it's a ornamental pear tree, ornamental plum tree, that'll give you color, it'll give you shade, flowers in the spring, gorgeous color in the fall. So picking the right plants for the right area is really, really important. A lot of people will say, well, I don't care how big it gets. I'm only going to be here for another 5 years or 10 years. So, but someone else is good, and there's nothing worse than cutting down a tree that just because it was put in the wrong spot. That tree's worked really hard to be big, full size, and now we're going to come through and cut it down and put something that actually should have been put in there in the first place.
One of the things that happens often here is folks will come in and maybe they just moved into a neighborhood and they have in hand the list of approved plants by their HOA. HOA plus and minuses, that could be a whole other class. However, just this week, these folks were in here and they had highlighted plants that they liked, said, no, not this one. And, even though we don't have a whole lot right now, I was able to go down the list and say, yes, we have this, this, and this, we'll look at them, we'll talk about them. And this was just a real early planning operation for them. They said, I think I like these, I'm not sure what these look like. What are the pluses and minuses? We spent about half an hour just wandering around and saying, look, this is good. I suggested some things that were on the list that they hadn't marked as ones that they liked and urged them to consider this, maybe to look them up on the internet, that sort of thing. So it's important too, a lot of times people will say, okay, I live so-and-so, I live in Granville. You mean I have a list of approved plants? Yes, I believe you do. I think I've seen it before, and we should really look at that before you invest in some trees, and then you have a neighbor that complains, and the HOA tells you have to take it out. I mean, you want to stay away from that, obviously. But knowing what your limitations are, what's approved and what isn't, that also goes into the mix of how do you select what you're going to put in your backyard.
Right. And the other really kind of important thing is nurseries. We're here to sell you plants, and people don't buy plants that aren't blooming or, so your landscape project is not going to be I'm going to get everything today and we'll be done. It's kind of an ongoing thing. So don't be disappointed because you can't find that crepe myrtle in April. You just won't have them because they don't start blooming until June. If we get them in April, you're going to be looking at sticks. No one wants to buy sticks. But like Doug said, the forsythias are going to be blooming. Your lilacs are going to be blooming. So kind of think seasonality. So, you're starting with the spring bloomers, and then you'll move into that summertime where you get your crepe myrtles, your rosa sharons, and things like that. And there's stuff that blooms all the time. Butterfly bushes will bloom usually from May all the way through summer, and even fall. Autumn sage is a great pop of color. It also helps with butterflies and hummingbirds if you like those to come to you and you like to watch them. Those are great plants to have in your landscape because they will do that. So think of seasonality as, you can actually learn to budget. I'm going to do this much in the springtime, I'm going to do this much in the summer, and this much in the fall. It'll make it easier for you to get it done and planted, or whether you have us planted or, a lot of people have their own little gardeners or landscapers that will do that for you.
Sometimes when you move into a house, maybe it's been recently built, what's often the case is that the builders have kind of put in the minimum requirement. This may be one evergreen, one deciduous, and 3 shrubs, and that's the front yard. And so, okay, you've got that as a start, but that may not be everything that you want. I recently visited the customer, and they had mostly evergreens, and they looked nice. They were in good shape, they were mature, and they were hiding the walls and serving the function. So we talked a lot about, let's add some color. Yeah, it's going to be deciduous, and the leaves will fall and fall off in the wintertime, but you get a contrast. Instead of more evergreens without much in the way of color of flowers, let's add some color. So color is really important, mix and match. A combination of evergreens, deciduous, flowering shrubs, ground covers, whatever it might be. That's what we're here to discuss with you, and what you like and don't like. I mean, people come in and say, I had periwinkle on the farm with grandma, and I hated it, and it was invasive, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Not the only choice in the world. There's certainly other plants that we can think about that help you make the right selection.
The other point that think about your senses. Sometimes if you have those rabbits or you have those deer, bringing scents in usually will help deter animals. They don't like the Russian sages. They don't like the autumn sages. Rosemary is a great plant that is an evergreen and it actually blooms. So it's one of those supers that you can add that gives you that pop of green that the animals won't mess with. Roses do remarkably well, but you have to protect them. So if you have a open front yard and a block wall backyard, don't put your roses in the front if you have deer walking through. Put them in the back. So they're protected a little bit, or put them right next to your house. A lot of times if you have a floodlight that comes on, the motion sensor, that'll deter deer from getting close to your house because it scares them. Sometimes they don't. It just kind of depends on the seasonality of what they're going through at the time.
Another important factor in the landscaping is the Firewise concept. Now, some of us may be living in houses that were built a long time ago before we thought too much about Firewise. So in those houses, it's possible that you've got evergreens growing up under the eaves and into the gutters of the house. Not a good idea. Nowadays, with all the things that happen in the climate and fires, it's important to have that defensible space. We have a whole class on Firewise, and by the way, all classes are archived on YouTube videos. You can always look up, scroll through subjects. You can get, I think, someone from the fire department to come and advise you about Firewise. But if you have a house that's, maybe the juniper is growing up and it's overgrown and it's too close to the house, it's something that you might consider taking out. And in general, deciduous trees are much safer. And it's always recommended that they be planted farther away from the house, at least 10 feet away. I mean, aspens, for example, are very Firewise. Junipers under the eaves are not. And so that's something that you want to think about. You invest in the house, and if you've got a bunch of mature plants that are close to the house, and you listen to the firemen, they say, if we drive by and the evergreens are burning near the house, we're just going to go to the next house, because we know we can't save this one. And next door, they might have a house that is more Firewise that we can help solve it. So that's something to bear in mind. Evergreens are wonderful. They just don't belong under the eaves in the house.
And that doesn't mean you can't have them. Usually they're strategically planted so they're further away where there is a control point before it gets to the house. And that's important. So you can still have your evergreens, but they're going to be on your walls, on the back side of your fences, the furthest most fences, than right there underneath your like that. The other important thing is to know the kind of where is the sun, and does it come up in the east, and so you have that east-facing front door where afternoon shade is abundant, or is it full west side where you get the blazing sun, most of the day? It's just hot, deserty. You just don't want to go out there. There are ways to bring plants in to give you some relief from that. A well-placed tree in the right spot will give you that relief in the afternoon. You don't get that blazing sun as you walk out the front door.
At the other end of the weather spectrum, of course, then is the cold factor in the winter. Everything that we have here, all of our perennials, all of our fruit trees or ornamental trees, they are all cold hardy, almost all of them. So that means they can survive to 0, -10. If it gets colder than that, then it seems unlikely that I feel like we're living in the wrong place. However, the fruit trees, they want a cold snap in the wintertime. They want a certain number of cold hours, chill time. And so a lot of these evergreens, they may go dormant and look kind of unhealthy in the wintertime. That's just part of the deal. They survive. They're okay with the cold weather. Same thing for the roses. And roses, you don't have to mulch them with bales of hay. And maybe you do that in other parts of the country where it's colder. But roses will survive the winter. My roses haven't even lost all their leaves yet. They're not flowering, but they still have leaves, even though they're supposed to be deciduous. But a lot of times the other thing people will do is we have a great selection of annuals, flowers and vegetables in the summertime. And you could do a mix and match. You've got your perennials that are going to be there every year, but they could be complemented in flower beds in a pot with annuals that you just change. Next season you put another batch in as you like them, as you see fit, as you see what looks healthy and appeals to you. So don't be afraid to mix and match in the landscape, because even pansies, for example, are famous around here for winter color. They are annual flowers, more or less, but they will survive cold and hailstorms. And I grew pansies for years, and my neighbors would say, "Oh, look at your pansies, they're under 3 feet of snow." I said, "So what? They're fine." They didn't believe me until the snow melted and it looked great. Finally, after about 10 years, the javelina discovered my pansies. So I couldn't do too much about that. They dug them out and decided they didn't like them, but they made a mess, and it was unfortunate. But usually they don't seem to like it. They stayed away for 10 years. I guess it just took them a while to find it. But when you're looking for winter color, in the fall we have pansies and chrysanthemums. They're really beautiful. They bring you a lot of color. For that time of year when things are kind of winding down to the rest of the garden.
And that's the great thing about here, like I said, the pansies, the snapdragon stock, they'll bloom most of the winter. We will actually carry them through May for that early spring time color. Probably February we'll get a new shipment starting in. As soon as March gets here, we'll really start ramping up as far as your annual color. I had this guy come in not too long ago in the fall, and big guy, biker, you know, these little guys really have the wrong name. It's like, who named this a pansy? It's so tough. And like Doug said, you can brush off the snow, and there they are, and they're just happy to be. So there are ways to get color all year round.
Another element in the landscaping, of course, is watering. So everything we grow here is going to need irrigation of some kind. We can't just depend on the monsoons. We know that some years we have them, some years it's kind of sparse. So if you don't have some kind of irrigation plans, because if you think about that, drip irrigation is really good. We have a brochure here that lists tree service people, people that can help you put in irrigation. And usually, with the drip irrigation, people turn them off in the winter because they don't want the pipes to freeze. However, you don't want to forget about winter watering. If we have a mild, dry winter, you should be out there maybe twice a month watering, especially new trees and new plants. Just because it snows a little bit doesn't really amount to much of anything. So once or twice a month in milder, drier weather, winter time, you should be out there. I mean, I have my drip turned off. I don't feel like turning it back on, so I'm just out there with a hose. I may leave it by a tree, walk away and do something else. But that's important because maybe in other parts of the country we didn't bother too much with winter watering. Here it's important. Dry winter can actually do damage to plants and trees that haven't been watered.
And you won't know until springtime, and it's like, my tree's not budding out. Why is that? Did you water this winter? No. That could be why. So it is really important. All those folks that like to, there's a lot of people that live in the valley in the wintertime and come up here in the summertime. Just know that, you know, landscaping is a responsibility. They do need, there's no such thing as a plant that can just be left out there. The other day I had someone say, you know, what about the forests? They don't get watered. Well, some years, like a couple of years ago when we had that really warm winter in the springtime and through that summer, you saw the pinions were dying. And then we had a big beetle push come through. So anytime a tree gets stressed, that will bring on your diseases and your pests. So it's really, really important to understand how plants work and take care of them, not so much like a person, but I mean, you do need to, they're not something that you can just set down and walk away from.
So the right amount of watering, intervals and duration and so on is a whole other topic, and it is very important. We have classes on that. We have some handouts as well. It's something that you have to really get a good handle on. I remember a couple summers ago, this gentleman came in and showed me a picture of his blue spruce that was turning brown. He was very unhappy because blue spruce didn't look healthy. He told me, even though I water it for 5 minutes every day, and I said, oh my goodness, why don't you try like an hour and a half every 10 days? I think that would be better for your tree. And initially he just looked at me like I was kind of crazy. I said, no, believe me, this is, 5 minutes doesn't get down to the roots and so on. I mean, I know you know this, but it's important that once you get started with new plants, they're going to need regular watering until they get established. Some of them, as time goes by, they're not going to need as much watering. I mean, I have Russian sage that I know I can turn the emitters off. The plant is so huge I can't even find the emitters. And so I say, okay, some have no water, some have emitters I can't find. They're both doing equally well. In fact, this winter I have to prune them. They're so huge, but that's, when they get mature, they can get to be really big. But watering, a whole other issue, but also something that's very important because, we don't live in a climate where it rains 3 times a week and everything grows like crazy. That's not what's going on here.
I think this needs to be interactive, so let's open it up. If you have questions or you want to talk about your landscape, we can do it here. I'd like to ask that we kind of keep it short. We will all be around later on if you have something bigger that you would like to discuss, but I'm sure you're not the only one that has that question, so I'd like to get some interactions to share with the rest of us, what's going on. It'll help everyone, your neighbor that's sitting next to you, and we'll walk through that. Like I said, we will all be around after the class to answer more detailed questions if you have them. Yes, ma'am?
Pruning, is it kind of a universal time for everything, or is there, depends on what you have?
So the question, I think I heard you ask about pruning. Is it the right time of year? Is that the question?
Correct.
It is the right time of year. I mean, ideal time to prune is in winter when the leaves are all off most of the deciduous trees and you can kind of see what's there. And the trees are kind of dormant. So normally and traditionally pruning and yard cleanup, that sort of thing, are done in the wintertime.
Same for shrubs and your sages and
Shrubs and sages will benefit. As I mentioned, my Russian sage is all dry. I go out there and start cutting it, and that sage powder gets in my sinuses, and I sneeze a lot. But yeah, they definitely could benefit. Shrubs, trees, new trees maybe don't need as much pruning. I mean, in general, the rules for pruning are that you can remove as much as 1/3 of the growth of a plant or a tree. It needs to be a little bit larger, not one that you just planted a few weeks ago. But the general rules are that you remove anything that's dead, diseased, or crossing branches are gonna just not help each other out at all. So you can start out small, a little bit of pruning, see how it does, especially if you just moved into a place. It's good to kind of see what happens in the course of a season or two. How much does it grow, how much pruning is required, what do the plants look like from one part of the year to another.
The only exception to that rule is your lilacs, your forsythias. Those need to be pruned after they bloom. If you prune them now, you won't have a bloom. So those are anything that really takes off in the spring, you don't want to touch. So forsythias, your lilacs, you want to do after they bloom in the spring, and then you can prune however you need to.
What about fruit trees?
Say that again?
Fruit trees.
Her question was about fruit trees. Springtime is a good time. When they're deciduous, you do your pruning.
It looks like there's already buds on the apple tree.
You will have buds. Buds will form in the fall, and they'll just sit there until it's warm enough for them to pop out.
But you don't want to prune them off, or you can?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Pruning just for the sake of pruning is not necessarily what needs to be done. I would ask, why are you pruning? Is it getting too big? Are you topping it so it stays lower? When you prune a fruit tree, like Doug said, you don't want, you're getting rid of the inside of the tree. So you can get in there, light can get in there. There's specific reasons why we prune certain things.
And it's difficult to explain in a conversation or even in an article how to prune properly. That's why, for example, the Master Gardeners have a pruning demonstration where you watch someone prune. And of course, there are videos. You can look at YouTube videos. Last winter, I looked at a video on pruning roses, and it was really kind of an eye-opener because this fellow recommended a whole lot more than I had ever pruned. And we're talking about major pruning down to 8 canes and open it up, and same kind of thing, crossing branches, dead disease, remove them. So I just watch this video because I was planning to go over to Charlotte Hall. They have that big rose garden there, and every spring the Master Gardeners kind of descend there and do all the pruning. And I thought I would help out. But it turned out that after doing a whole lot of pruning, and there were like 10 people pruning and 5 people hauling away on the cuttings, thank goodness we were tripping over them, the superintendent and the Master Gardener there said, "Oh, more on that tree, more on that tree." So he was not bashful at all. This time, around here, the time of year for pruning roses is usually March. So let them do whatever they want during the winter. We may get mild weather, they'll send out some sprouts, but chances are it'll get cold again. So if you wait till March, and if you have mature roses, you can prune the heck out of them, and they will love it. They'll come back next spring. By May, they will be looking good. So you don't have to be bashful about roses.
If the roses have lost their leaves, you pick them off.
If you don't. Her question was if you need to pick off the leaves of the roses if they're still on there, and no, they're fine.
What did you get to the point where you got a lot of this? Some's not dead. I've got some that have just a lot of tiny little thin branches.
She has a rose that has a lot of tiny thin branches. So yeah, you are, like Doug said, there is a procedure for pruning roses. I don't know. Do we have a
But you can wait.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it now, you don't have to worry about it. And sometimes, the flowers will stay on, or the flowers will turn the rose hip. It doesn't really matter. They're dormant, they're doing okay. When March comes along, they're starting to wake up. You get in there with a pole with a pruner, and, don't worry about taking too much out because they'll come back.
And your purpose, just like for the trees, you're just kind of thinning it out to give it more air, where air and light can get in there. Because if you have this really dense, compact rose or fruit tree, the stuff that's inside is going to die off because it's just not getting that light, or, it'll attract bugs and stuff because it's so dark and dense in there, moist, so you'll start seeing your diseases and your bugs come in. Yes, sir.
Topping fairly new trees. We put some trees in last August, 20 gallon, 24 gallon trees, and we want them to be fuller, not necessarily taller. Is this a good time to top them?
His question was about topping trees. Usually we don't recommend doing any pruning on new trees until 3 years. Because your first 2 years all go to your roots. As soon as you start doing major pruning, you get major growth. The tree says, "Ooh, look at me." And once you get that major growth, your roots aren't going to grow. So you really want that energy to focus on the roots. After 3 years, if you feel you want to top a tree, go for it. And that'll give you that thicker, fuller tree.
And just to follow up on that, again, we have YouTube videos. We'll have a class this spring where an arborist usually an arborist from Johnny's Landscape will come, he'll do a talk, and he has a white paper there that shows where to do the cuts. But if I have a feeling from listening to one of his classes, he says, don't top off. Don't just go and top off the top of any tree. Because what sometimes happens, you've got branches really tall, you top it off, you get this kind of witch's nest of thin, new growth that looks sort of like sucker. So it's really important to, when you're pruning, especially the first few times that you're pruning, you need to make judicious cuts. You need to think about where you're going to make the cuts for the things we talked about, the factors. Be careful about just topping off a tree randomly, like giving it a coup cut sort of thing. That's not always the best thing. And you can have a look at that, and you look at drawings and you'll see the shape of the tree, and you'll say, make the cut here and here and here. That's usually a better bet than just shaving off the top.
I have a climbing rose that's on the northwest facing wall, not getting enough sun. I need to transplant it. When's a good time to do that?
Spring. His question was, he's got a rose on a northwest facing wall, it's not getting enough sunshine. Springtime is the ultimate time to do that.
So in the April timeframe?
I would do it here in March.
In March,
Yeah,
okay.
before it starts pushing that new
Okay.
growth.
Thanks.
And is this rose, has it been there a while?
This climber's been there maybe 4 years or so, and it's doing moderately okay, but could be doing a lot better if it was over on southeast facing
Right,
side.
right.
Yeah.
So since you mentioned transplanting, we should also talk about, sometimes transplanting works, but sometimes it doesn't. The more mature a tree or shrub is, the less likely it's going to transplant successfully. Something you just planted here and you find out that it's like there's nothing but clay and poor drainage, but it's only a relatively, 1-year-old tree or whatever, you could probably transplant successfully. But, the illness of shock and the roots that you're ripping out of the ground, that sort of thing, So don't expect that, it's gotta happen. I mean, there's so many folks come in there and say, I have huge ponderosa pines on my property, I want to transplant them all. I said, I wouldn't do it. You might as well just cut them down, because it's just they're gonna suffer too much. The root system goes from here to the other end of Yavapai County.
So the best way to succeed in that is you want to get as much of the root ball as you possibly can. You really want to have that site where you're going to put it dug out and ready to go. The most important thing about transplanting is if the roots dry out at all, your plant's toast. So be prepared, you kind of know what you're going to do ahead of time, and you'll be more successful.
Yes, ma'am.
Cactuses on a drip system, how much water are they supposed to have?
Her question was cactuses on a drip system. Take them off the drip system.
And then how much water are they supposed to have after that?
Cactuses probably, and it depends on whether it's a brand new cactus you just planted last year or if it's been there forever and a day. If it's been there for a long time, I wouldn't water it any more than once a month. If it's new, maybe every 2-3 weeks. Basically, you're kind of keeping that root system so it doesn't completely dry out.
Okay, so it's a smaller plant, how much water every 2 or 3 weeks would you give it? A gallon? Less?
Probably, when you water, cactuses are really important that if you're going to water thoroughly. Don't just drip drop and it's done. It's not going to do any good. If you're going to water, and then just leave it be.
When is a good time to transplant a tree?
Her question was, when to transplant trees. Anything that's dormant, as long as it's dormant, that's a good time to transplant. So February, March is great to transplant that tree because it doesn't have the leaves out. Anything that has leaves, you're going to get some shock. So if it's dormant, it's definitely able to do it. Using the root and grow once spring does get here will help alleviate that transplant shock. It will also stimulate those hair roots so that as soon as the soil starts warming up, they'll start reaching out.
Can you talk about different names of plants that flower at different times of year?
Her question was plants that flower at different times of year. Sure. In your springtime, your columbine, your iberias, your candy tuft, delphiniums, all bloom in this early spring, and they're perennials. Shrubs, you've got your forsythia, your lilacs, those are going to bloom early spring. As summertime comes in, you're going to start doing your butterfly bushes, your autumn sages, your Russian sages, the Lumis spirea, those all start blooming usually April, May time frame. You'll start getting some pretty blooms. And the nice thing about most of those is that they'll bloom until late fall, early winter.
Then, when we get to May and June, you might start seeing the crepe myrtles and the lantana. We have a perennial lantana as well. Oftentimes, and I do this myself, I look at my crepe myrtles and I'm thinking, okay, it's warm, what are you waiting for, right? And my lantana, it's a hardy lantana, it hasn't done anything, it doesn't look very hardy to me. And I have to tell myself, be patient. There are some plants that just will not do much of anything until hot weather comes along. And crepe myrtle and lantana are nice. So what Michelle's talking about earlier in the year, starting with the forsythia and moving on to these other plants. Crepe myrtle, and, we might not really get hot weather until June around here, you never know. But in the meantime, roses usually go crazy in May. And then they slow down a little bit in June, come back in July, depending on the kind of plant.
I'm going to intercede real quick. Speaking of roses, we've got the fiber pot roses, dormant roses, they will be coming in that week of February 4th. So they won't be green, they'll just be sticks, but they come in, it's a great time to get them in because you alleviate that transplant shock. And you can just let them be, and you don't have to worry about them in May, you know, when they're blooming and flowering and go through that wilt. So it's a great time to get new roses in, is in February.
Does your perennial lantana look the same as the annual lantana?
Yes, the question was about lantana, and the perennial lantana, which is called the Miss Huff Hardy lantana, it's sort of a reddish orange flower. It doesn't come in all the shades of lavender and red and green or whatever, but it looks like a lantana, an annual lantana that you might put in a bed, except it's bigger. I mean, it has big stalks. I've got one right by the street in my yard. It's maybe been there 3 years. I think it's this wide, or maybe about this tall. I was just looking at it this morning thinking,
And do you
okay, I
have
want to
to,
prune you in a while,
I
but
was gonna say, you have to prune it.
yeah, I prune it every year. It has thick stalks. I mean, it really, it puts out a lot of flowers and fills in nicely. And then it kind of fades a little bit. And late in the summer, early fall, weather gets cooler, and then it doesn't flower as much. But it's definitely a late starter, since you were asking about this timeline, the sequence of what flowers when in the yard that we get to learn. And you know, in your yard, it might vary a little bit. Every place is slightly different. These are general guidelines for lantana and crepe myrtle.
And the nice thing about lantana, there is a taller version and a shorter version. So, you know, if you don't want one that's huge, there is a shorter version that's yellows and pinks that is really pretty as well. Back to her, the seasonality of flowers. Annuals, like we mentioned before, pansies, snapdragon, stock, the ornamental kale, and cabbage, all of those will be in the nursery through usually May. As soon as that April-May time period starts, those will all be gone. You will not see a pansy in this place after May. They just don't do well in the summertime. They don't like our heat unless you have a really secluded, shady area. Then our tomatoes and veggies and stuff will start coming in. So there is a hot season for veggies as well. And then fall, you get your coneflowers, your Guardias, black-eyed Susans, your rudbeckias, your mums, all of that stuff is kind of fall blooming stuff.
I think there's a question back there, sorry.
What about spreading ground covers? Any recommendations?
So the question is about spreading ground covers, and we have several here. Of course, the standard is sort of juniper. We have several different kinds of juniper that will not get very tall, maybe a foot or less, but will spread out quite a bit. Cotoneaster does well. If you need a ground cover in a shady area, periwinkle is usually the best. It will fill in nicely. It propagates on its own. In fact, if you're not careful with them, try and take over the yard. But we have, what other ground covers do we have to show?
Kinnikinick, bearberry, it is actually an evergreen and it will do well in the full sun. I had one and I just lost
Well,
it.
over here we've got some manzanita. I mean, that gets maybe a foot or more tall, but it's kind of a ground cover. If you hiked it all in the national forest, you'll see manzanita everywhere. So it's sort of somewhere in between a shrub and a ground cover, but it will definitely fill in.
Manzanita, how does it, I know in California, River Falls and several places have campfires that have manzanita. Ours at Firewise here.
It's not. Her question was manzanita as far as Firewise. It's considered yeah.
Yeah, in
So it's
fact,
not something you want underneath your house.
no, and manzanita, it's great because people don't water it very much, but they mean it's very dry. If you ever, again, back in the national forest, on some of the trails, there's manzanita everywhere when they die. Yeah, well, they have some machines they bring in that just crushes them, they call it rush crush. So you see this all on the ground, so it's not up in the air, so when a fire comes along, you know, it can arrive. But anyway, yes, ma'am.
Question, I have a weeping birch, which I thought was a regular birch, until the girl pointed out that it's weeping, you know, the leaf. How do I care for that tree? Because, I mean, you know, the branches are going down, just let it keep going down, or?
Her question was, she's got a weeping birch, and how to take care of it. My question would be, is it touching the ground?
Oh.
Is it?
No, it's only a year and a half old.
Okay. So, well, just leave it alone. It'll grow. You know, your trunk is going to get taller. Your limbs will continue to
Do I want to
drape.
prune that at all? Do I want to
I would say if it gets really long and it's touching the ground, I would go ahead and trim it. And again, if it's just been planted, I wouldn't do anything until 3 years. And then, you know, if you're trying to get underneath it, or, you know, it starts getting hard to clean out, definitely do some pruning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the tree I would have picked, but
For caring for like natural plants, you know, like Indian pines or the alligator junipers, or some of the big things that you kind of inherit from them.
Her question was kind of care for native plants that you kind of inherited. Typically, those are pretty much on their own. However, you know, if we have a really dry spell, throw the hose, you know, out there. Let it get a good drink once a month. You know, you don't have to water on a weekly schedule because they do have long taproots. You know, the water table is further down, so you're not having to water all the time. But if it's a really long period of drought, definitely throw a hose on it. Also remember when you're watering, your drip line, where you should be watering, is out of the furthermost branches of the tree, not where the original landscaper put your drip system. It's not doing any good right there. So every time, you know, I would say every couple of years as your tree grows, you should be moving that and adding lines. Because as your tree gets larger, the amount of water you should be putting on it. I mean, sometimes you start out with, you know, like 10 gallons of water when you start watering, depending on the size of your tree. You know, a 25-foot tree that has a 30-foot spread, that's a lot of water, you know, and so remember that as you go. For older landscapes, usually we say a gallon, gallon and a half per foot of height, just to kind of give you a rough guesstimate on the amount of water that should be put on there.
Can you overwater in the winter?
Yes, you can. Her question was, can you overwater in the winter? I would say our biggest, worst problem in this industry is overwatering. We're all nurturers at heart. Plants start going, our first instinct is to water. Whether that water, you know, the plant's getting in a bunch of water, it's just what we do. It's like, oh, I just water. Always check. If in doubt, check. We have water meters. You can use rebar, but you want to go, you know, fairly deep. You know, you're not just testing that first 3 inches. You're going down a good foot to find out whether you actually need to water.
When it comes to watering, more often than not, the problem is too much watering rather than not enough in general. And it can happen here, and some of us that have, you know, poor drainage in our soils, you know, you look at the plant, as Michelle said, oh, it's not doing too well, I think I'll water it some more. When too much water and it's sitting there and not draining is the problem, and we're just making it worse by adding more water. That's why it's important, anytime that you see a shrub, tree, anything that's growing in your yard, and you think something doesn't look right about it, you can bring a little cutting in. And we've got a microscope out there, projects up onto a computer screen, and we can oftentimes advise you about what's going on there. Too much water, not enough, aphids, whatever it might be. It's got incredible enlargement property, so it can really help us with that.
Yeah, and kind of back to the design thing, you know your ground, because our watering instructions are general. It's not going to be the same for you as it is for you. If one of you is up at Thumbs Butte and it's all BG and it's just porous and it goes right through, you're probably going to have to water a whole lot more than she is if she's down in Granville and she has that heavy clay. Heavy clay holds that moisture in, so there is a difference. So it's always important to listen to your plants. Pay attention to your plants. Don't just let them out there, every other day or so. Make sure you're looking at everything that's in your yard, because bugs and drought can show up really quickly. And if you're not paying attention, you can have some serious damage.
If you're in an area where you moved and there's a lot of imported soil, how are you going to know exactly whether she's on a graded plot and I'm on a fill plot? What kind of soil you actually got?
Her question was kind of figuring out what kind of soil you have. We have this thing called a perk test that we recommend that everybody do, whether you're new or old to the area. You actually just go out and dig a hole, fill it with water, and set a timer. Find out how fast that water drains. If it drains within 4 to 8 hours, you've got fairly decent drainage. If it's less than 4 hours, your drainage is really, really good. So there are different ways to do that. There's also soil tests. You can do that yourself, or we do it here for a fee. You can bring it in, we can tell you what your nitrogen and your phosphorus, your pH. I can pretty much guarantee anybody that brings a soil test in, your pH is going to be high. It's just what we are, which is why our fertilizers have that sulfur in it, because the sulfur will help bring that pH down.
When's the right time to fertilize mature trees and large tubers? Two different questions.
So the question was the right time to fertilize large trees and junipers. Well, you can do it right now. We usually recommend that you fertilize 3 or 4 times a year. We have an all-purpose fertilizer. It's a slow-release organic product. And if you fertilize it now, what you're doing is you're feeding for the next season, which is going to be the springtime. And so 3 or 4 times a year is something that you can do continuously throughout the years. And the seasons are, as we say, Easter, 4th of July, Halloween, and maybe New Year's Eve or New Year's Day afterwards. Those are the good times to fertilize. And we have a fertilizer that works for everything in your yard. It's great. I just walk around with a bucket. I figure I'm going to fertilize everything. It's one pass. I'm done. And I'm done for a quarter or so. So right now is a good time with your feeding.
Which fertilizer is that?
It's called
Water's all-purpose. It's a 744. It's a slow-release formula. Yeah. We also have a fruit and vegetable fertilizer as well, if you have a lot of that stuff. It has calcium in it, so for like your tomatoes and your squash that tend to shrivel up at the ends, that's blossom end rot and it's a lack of calcium.
And that's in the 744,
The calcium is in the fruit and vegetable fertilizer. So if you like the 744, you can always, we sell calcium nitrate just for those few things.
I'd like to put a plug in for your flower powder. That stuff is dynamite. It's incredible on potted plants, on containers, and on roses.
So this gentleman just gave us a plug for the flower power. It is a water-soluble fertilizer that we sell for annuals, pots, anything that blooms. It has a 54 as a middle number, which is just bloom, bloom, bloom. So it's great stuff. You put it on every 2 weeks. You just mix it up in a watering can and pour it on. Really easy to use. hanging baskets is phenomenal for, it'll just keep those blooming all the time.
I read this morning that 744 was good for wildflowers, you know, when you're planting. Well, now, I guess you kind of do my last question, do the all-purpose for the trees and the 744 for wildflowers, or can they be mixed? Or what?
The all-purpose and 744 are one and the same.
Okay,
Yes.
that's really what I was
Sorry,
asking.
we didn't make that clear, it's one and the same. So, yeah, they work well for both of them.
Great.
Yeah.
And actually, next week, we're having a class on wildflowers, and I can tell you it was a sneak preview that would recommend that you put 744 in with the mulch and the seeds, you blend it all together, and that's what you broadcast out into the ground. But that'll be next week's class.
So while we're here, let's just mention that we're starting to gather our people. So next week, our class will be up in the upper house. So we put all the shades down and we turn the heat up. So don't worry about freezing. We'll make it comfortable for you. Any other questions? Yep.
What about fertilizing the lawn?
Her question was fertilizing the lawn. The 744 it can be used on the lawns as well.
Do you do it now, or?
Yeah, usually March is when we do that. So, yeah, we do it once a quarter. So as long as you stay on that system, you're good to go. Yeah, one more.
I have an area that's shaded almost all the time. It's right at my front door. It's a north-facing wall and east. So there's very little sun throughout the year. And then I have another section that gets very little. And they're all in the front of the house. What can I put there so it doesn't look like a big pile of dirt?
We have all sorts of things over
All
there.
right.
We have a shade section in the summertime out here where you can look at periwinkle and all kinds of other plants as well.
Okay.
And you're one of the few. Shady spots are really hard to find unless you move into a older, more established area. You don't get a lot of shade around here, so having shade is a really fun thing.
Is there any kind of magnolia that grows here?
Her question was about magnolias and do they grow here? Yes, they do. There are several. We get the Bracken's Brown Beauty. It's the thicker leaf. It does need a little protection from the afternoon sun, so if you could put it on the east side or kind of with other trees, it would probably appreciate it. But it's the one with the really beautiful, gorgeous flowers. Yes, sir.
Do grapes come back? We put in a couple grape plants and they look dead. With the trees we had in November.
Yeah, his question was about grapes and do they come back? Yes, they do. If you've been watering, give it time. It's still early, folks. We're still in the middle of winter, so give it time. You'll start seeing sprouts, usually March-ish, April, you'll start seeing buds pop out.
Did you trim those vines back at all? Or just
Yeah, grapes has a whole other section of pruning, and we do have a fruit class coming up, so they will touch base on those, but yeah, usually with grapes, you keep your main stalk and, lateral branches, and then you're going to prune, because if you don't prune, you'll end up with grapes that don't bloom, so pruning is good for grapes.
When do you prune? When do you prune the grapes?
March. Yeah. So March is our time frame for pruning, just because most of our cold is over with. I mean, we're going to drop below 32 probably more than once between March and May. But it's the time where you're not going to get that 10 degrees where you're going to get that freezer frostbite where you're going to lose this much of the cane on your rows. So everything in March is great.
you're talking about consultations earlier. Is there a lead time on that? You guys get busy when you're doing that? Or- I'm thinking like a couple of months from now.
A couple of months, he's asking about lead time on consultations, and certainly a couple of months out is very doable. When we do the consultations, it's on a day that we're not working here and helping customers, but there's several of us who do consultations when we have our fee. So 2 months out is not a big deal. I usually think in terms of maybe 2 weeks out. I'm doing one next week, maybe one in a couple weeks. One thing to consider as far as timing is that if you do a consultation now within the next couple of weeks, there's less to look at here. Usually the consultation follow-up involves kind of strolling through here and saying, remember this spot over here by the garage, this is what I think would be good. We don't have as many of those now as we might, and we will in, say, April or May, March or April, even beginning of, end of February.
But on that point, as April and May come, yeah, it's going to be busier, which is why there's 3 or 4 of us that do it, so we can try to take care of people in a timely manner. Usually we're at about 2 weeks out on consultations in April and May. But again, if I can't get to it, Doug does it. If Doug can't do it, Amy does it. So, we'll definitely try to keep it timely as far as that goes.
Get your plants into the ground in a timely manner so they can grow. Or now is a good time to do it.
Again, as far as timely is getting plants in the ground, it kind of depends on what you're looking for. Do we actually have plants here? We, as a nursery, we really don't start getting a lot of stuff in, except for our trees and shrubs, until March and April, because they're just not doing anything right now, and no one wants to look at them. So, usually, peak time is April and May, June is when we plant. As far as our planting services, we can get backed up on that as well. Usually in May, April, May, and June, they're usually 3 or 4 weeks out. So try to plan ahead if you can, and we'll get to you as soon as we can. Yeah. Anything else? Oh, yeah. One final question.
I have a hard time wrapping my head around watering time, and during the different seasons, if it's every other day during the peak crop season, duration, with the drip systems on trees, shrubs, plants, potted plants, so is there a rule of thumb?
So her question is back to watering and the rule of thumb. Again, it kind of depends on where you are. So we do troubleshooting questions with you, so we can try to figure out what kind of, are you in where your plants get really good drainage, or are you in clay? Those are 2 of the big questions. And as far as watering, you don't have to water every day or every other day. Usually we recommend twice a week for new shrubs and trees. Once a week after that is all we recommend, but you're watering deeply.
Duration. Depends on your soil.
It depends on your soil. If you have a large tree and you have one dripper and you have one system that does everything, you're going to need more drippers on that tree, or everything else is going to drown while you. So look at your drip system. Make sure you have enough emitters to actually get that 25 gallons that your tree needs and your shrub only needs 2. So look at your emitters, figure out what size they are. Usually they run from a ½ a gallon emitter to 5 gallon emitters. So you can add the right number of emitters for your tree or shrub.
I was just going to mention along that line, on the back of our business cards, there's a chart that's good general information as well. So if you want to follow up on that, both Doug and Michelle have business cards that will have that chart on the back.
And when in doubt, check. Get yourself a water meter. in the ground, or take a piece of rebar and kind of push it in. If it comes out wet, you don't need to water. You know, don't water just because someone said you need to water every other day.
That's what they said the first year to establish and have a root system to water every day.
Whoever told you
That's
that
probably
was
not a
wrong.
good idea. And, to answer your question, the answer for you is going to be different for her, and everybody's going to have a different answer. So in addition to, look, as Ken said, the back of the card has some general guidelines. On our website, there's a handout that talks about watering. A lot of times it's, how much water, can you gauge how much water is getting down to the roots, the bottom of the root ball of your tree? That's what you want to do. How many gallons that is, what the duration is, I don't know, it's going to depend. So I think that you have to understand how much water you're putting out there, how deep is it getting into the ground. So there's no one answer that's going to work for everybody, unfortunately. But it's something that you can, become knowledgeable about, just like we said at the very beginning. Learn to know what's happening in your yard, your conditions, the soil, the sunshine, the wind, that kind of thing, the animals, all those things are factors in how much do I water, how frequently, what duration.
All right, we're going to wrap this up, but we'll be around if you have questions. We can definitely help you out there. Thank you